Dr. Rob Robinson, and my fellow Jody, Dr. Jody Vallejo from USC. And now I'm going to take my seat, Jody Ballman from Fullerton College.
All right, good evening, everyone. Am I coming in okay in the back? Fantastic. Thank you for showing up. I found out about 3 minutes ago I'm going to be moderating tonight, so but these sort of things happen a lot this time of year, graduations, award banquets. Someone's like, oh, it's your turn to talk. I'm like, great. So we have here tonight 4 faculty members who have been asked to speak on specific areas of expertise. And so each of us is going to spend about hopefully 5 to 7 minutes. And if someone would like to glare at me if we're starting to go over that, because academics like to talk. I'm going to talk about separation of powers, executive orders. Jody's going to be talking about the bureaucracy and DOGE and some of the spending cuts. And then we're going to be talking on immigration and foreign policy, which is a lot. Tariffs obviously also are a big thing, but we weren't able to get a subject matter for that, and 4 is actually a good number for a panel. And of course, you can ask any questions that you want. After each of us is done talking, we will open up to the audience for questions. We'll just kind of parcel those out based on who's talked most recently and area of expertise.
Can I just thank you all for being here today?
Yeah.
And all of you, thank you.
So, since I was tasked with setting up the order, I put myself first. And in typical professorial fashion, took notes on a random notebook, a graph paper from my oldest son. I know, my poor students. So, I wanted to start off by talking about executive orders and separation of powers, because I think it is one of the more important things that's going on that people are concerned about, that's getting a lot of news attention. And I'm going to start with very basic things and move up to more complicated things. An executive order is a proclamation by the president that typically sets rules or regulations or reorganizes the executive branch. Typically, the authority for an executive order comes from one of 2 places. The first is the U.S. Constitution. And the best example of this would be the president's powers in Article 2 as Commander-in-Chief. So when President Truman signed an executive order to desegregate the U.S. military in 51, I should know that, and I don't. Thank you, sir. 47. That was done primarily under his role as Commander-in-Chief. Now, the other source of power for an executive order is a congressional statute, because a lot of times Congress will pass laws where they will foresee a certain circumstance perhaps coming to pass. And the president is authorized to kind of, if that trigger is passed, then the president is authorized to act in a certain way. And we have a couple examples of this going on right now in our politics with the Trump administration. One is that both in this term and in his first term, some of Trump's executive orders have relied upon emergency language in a statute. Congress will put in language in the statute that would say, if the president declares an emergency of some sort, then they are further authorized to take this action. And it's going to vary from statute to statute. That relates, I think, pretty well to some of the things going on at the border right now. It's been characterized as an emergency by this administration. Another example would be many of the tariffs are based upon national security language. That normally, tariffs are set by Congress as part of their control over lawmaking. But that the president was authorized to set tariffs in particular situations when the president deems that there is an issue of national security. Now, there are legal arguments out there right now, there are lawsuits in the hopper, that the Trump administration has stretched these terms beyond their normal meaning. But that is not an unusual debate for presidents and Congresses to have, to argue about what the language of a statute authorizes the president to do. So I think while the Trump administration has stretched those terms They're not the first administration to do so, nor will they be the last. Beyond that, though, I think there are a number of executive orders. I haven't counted them, so don't ask me for a numerator or denominator here. But there are a number of executive orders issued by the administration that don't really have an obvious authorization. And that's where I think a lot of the concern and separation of powers battles and challenges are taking place right now. My most obvious example of this, I think, would be a Trump administration executive order, which basically commands states and state electoral organizations to make changes to state election law. Now, states have the authority primarily over elections in the United States. Congress does have the authority to pass rules to go over top of the states, right? The president does not. So the president has to either rely on a congressional statute, but they cannot simply do things on their own in that regard. And that's an example of this, the presidency sort of running into problems. Now, I do want to put this in larger context. And this is more of a theory that I subscribe to than a fact. So feel free to disagree with me. But my take on this is that while Trump has supercharged the phenomenon of trying to govern by executive order, he did not begin it, nor I think ultimately is he the cause of it. I put the blame here pretty firmly on Congress. Congress is able to act and pass laws in theory. In practice, because of high degrees of polarization between the parties and very close margins between the parties, they're unable to get much done. And you may remember in 2012, I believe, Barack Obama, frustrated by Congress's inability to do what he thought was necessary on immigration, passed, among other things, an executive order on DACA, which I should know the abbreviation for, and I don't. I think it's Deferred Action something.
Childhood.
Thank you. I forget a lot of things. In my defense, there's a lot of things to know. That was immediately challenged, right? But so presidents trying to govern by executive order because Congress is broken is not a new phenomenon, and I don't think it's going to stop. It's just that Trump has, in very Trumpian fashion, sort of blown past some of the kind of traditions and norms and limits that other presidents saw that he has not seen fit to do. I think spending, by the way, a lot of the actions that Trump has taken on spending, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but the Doge has taken on spending, are also not authorized by any particular statutory or constitutional authority. And I think this is why, for large part, the Trump administration has not fared that well in the lower courts to date. And that doesn't mean that he hasn't been successful in some of these objectives, because if people are fired or money is taken away or grants is canceled, they don't get uncanceled necessarily. The people don't come back necessarily if they win in court. Courts are slow, and they require process and lots of back and forth, and they don't have meaningful enforcement capability. So they're not ideal checks on the president in a lot of ways. Again, this goes back to my thought that a broken Congress is the root of many of these issues that we see here, and Congress has not done a lot to date. I would point out one final thing before I pass the microphone, so to say, over to Jody, and that is I don't, in Trump's defense, I guess, I think the 100 days framework is a little unfair to almost every president who's not FDR, because FDR had 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate being members of his party. If I was president and had a 2/3 majority of my party in office, I would be the second most famous president of the past 150 years. Again, I think Trump's decisions to govern by executive order is in part a result of the fact that his party has such narrow majorities. And is really, I think, even on Republican priorities like passing a tax cut, which is the most standard Republican thing to do in power that we know of for decades, they're still having trouble figuring out what that tax cut's going to look like and how to pay for it, because those majorities are so slim. So I think it's a combination of Trump's own sort of desire to do things on his own, but also a larger statement on our government. I don't know how to fix Congress. But we can ask questions about it, talk about it later, if you like. So thank you. Jody?
Thank you. Did that go on, or was it already on? It was. Oh.
It wasn't. Okay. So, talking about DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk, the budget cuts that we have seen already before a budget is actually passed, it is kind of complicated because there isn't congressional authority for these cuts. Congress has already allocated. We've had Supreme Court case when Republicans wanted to give the president the line item veto, and the Supreme Court rightly interpreted that you would have to add that to the Constitution to make it constitutional, and we have not. So I'm not sure where these cuts are going to end up in the courts, but I'll talk about the overall. So the first is really to think big picture, 50,000 feet in the air, what public goods are. And it's important to understand in a capitalist economy that what we ask of our governments, whether it is local or state or federal, we ask the government to do that capitalism won't. And with values of equity and access for all, that it is not only available for those who can pay. A bookstore is a capitalist enterprise, a library is not. So when we're looking at these cuts, and there's a very good book by Michael Lewis called, I have some recommendations for a lot of things, Who is Government? Michael Lewis is one of the brilliant nonfiction writers who keeps getting his books turned into Hollywood blockbuster movies, like Moneyball, like The Big Short. So, incredible storyteller. And what he did after the first Trump administration was write a book called The Fifth Risk, which was about the transfer of power, or what ended up being the book was the lack of transfer of power between the Obama administration, who had prepared countless binders to hand off to the Trump administration that never showed up for them. And he then decided to ask some of his brilliant storytelling friends to choose a member of the federal government to investigate and write about, and the stories are incredible. And most public employees, most federal employees, state employees, local employees, do not seek nor want the limelight. They want to put their heads down and do a good job, which is why it's so easy for DOGE to demonize them, because they're not known to us. So, this is not the first time that we're talking about cutting the federal government. Reagan and Bush and Clinton Gore famously did Reinventing Government, but those cuts were evaluations of waste in the government, evaluations of efficiencies that could be had that then went to Congress. This is taking a sledgehammer, or most famously a chainsaw, without understanding of what these agencies or people do, and without any seeming curiosity to find out. Control F is no way to find waste. In fact, the DOGE department has done some real damage to programs they didn't intend to because they didn't understand them. Some of them, like the program for foster kids transitioning to adulthood, that they thought was transgender. No one wants that cut. The National Nuclear Safety Administration seems pretty clear in the name what it does. They didn't, and they fired them, and then struggled to rehire them because they had deleted their emails and didn't have contact information. There's so many lies being told. Elon Musk stood in the Oval Office and said that he had temporarily, mistakenly canceled the Ebola prevention team, but they brought them back, except that a fact check showed that today they have not been brought back. So finding the truth is important. And as I remind my students, we used to be able to trust what was said with fact checking, with journalism. But you should be able to believe what a Secretary of Health and Human Services says. But you can't, because he just declared that 50% of China has diabetes. That's untrue, just in case you were wondering. No Google necessary. So, one of the problems for all of us is that this administration is chaotic by design. We are bombarded with information, it is hard to keep up, and the disrespect that was shown to these career public servants is tragic, and our nation owes them a debt of gratitude. Many found out by email that they were fired. Many found out because their badges stopped working when they went to work and they couldn't enter. That data is not safe. So there are lots of problems about that, but CBS just published, let me get the numbers right, on this that, that might be over here. DOJ claims the goal was to cut $2 trillion. Oh, and let me back up a little bit and talk about the budget basics. So I think all of us can agree that we should talk about the budget. We have we're borrowing $2 trillion a year, and the national debt, when I started teaching 25 years ago, was $8 trillion total. It's now $36 trillion. We have a massive problem. We are borrowing to pay the bills every year. We bring in $5 trillion, we spend $7 trillion, I'm rounding off there. So the idea that we would cut $2 trillion is not absurd. We are borrowing that and adding to the debt. However, we do need to take a scalpel and we need to have national discourse about what those cuts would be. To start with USAID because foreign aid isn't popular is mathematically dumb. Because it is less than 1% by a huge margin. So if you want to cut, you gotta look at where we spend. And where we spend is pretty clear. We spend on Social Security, we spend on Medicare, we spend on Medicaid, we spend on national defense, and we spend on interest on the debt. So if we want to get serious about cuts, we have to talk about that. But when we're talking about cutting $880 billion from Medicare or Medicaid, and the president has said he will make no cuts to Medicare, that is a massive, devastating cut to Medicaid. And if you look at Orange County, 30% of people in Orange County are on Medicaid, many in nursing homes. The entire nursing home industry will be bankrupt without Medicaid dollars. So we need to talk about that before that cut happens. That's what Congress is for. But as Rob said, Congress is broken. So, we didn't have them ask you questions.
Oh no, we're all gonna.
Okay, we're all gonna wait till the end. So, a couple more minutes. The other factor beyond cuts, of course, when we do math, is raising taxes, which we could have a conversation on. Social Security is a huge part of our budget, but the cap on when people stop paying in is $168,600. So is that 1 minute for Elon Musk? Well, anyone making $168,000 or less pays 100% through the year. Those who make above stop contributing to Social Security. So Robert Reich, former Secretary of Labor under Clinton, has talked a lot about raise the cap. Raise the cap, let's have a conversation about that. Raise the cap. It's an outdated number that has not kept up with inflation. And so that's a conversation that we could have. We could have a conversation about not extending the 2017 tax cuts. We could have a conversation about not cutting IRS agents. because that cut saves minuscule amount on salary and will allow people to get away with not paying taxes with very little fear of an audit. So there are lots of ways that we could talk about cutting and ways to talk about raising taxes that require a really hard decision, which is what our representative government is supposed to do. But they have abdicated in this opportunity and somewhat put Elon Musk in as the person who will lose everything in public opinion and protect those that we elected to make these decisions. So there are lots of problems with Doge. There are lots of problems, and I recommend watching 60 Minutes while they are still doing investigative journalism. They've had amazing reports, including a very scary, don't watch it before you go to sleep, because you won't, but on the bird flu pandemic and the very real problems with eliminating those researchers. John Oliver did a great show last night on Health and Human Services and talking about the incredibly small savings that we get for incredible risk in food safety, in the CDC that we all learned about 5 years ago, incredibly important to understand that. We don't have pandemic team anymore as we are watching the bird flu. As we are watching measles, we don't have reporters on the ground. Wisconsin has a lead paint crisis, and the team that they are supposed to coordinate was all fired at the federal government. They have no one. The former the press secretary for Trump, who's now governor of Arkansas, dealing with floods in her state, is begging her former boss for FEMA dollars that she can't get for the people. These are dollars that we all collectively paid in for public goods. I am happy to pay 0.6 of a dollar to get children Head Start and Meals on Wheels. And that was slashed. The NIH grants that have devastated our universities and research teams, that, by the way, is an economic boon to everybody before we even get to the scientific advances that they have made in the last 30 years in making cancer chronic and not fatal. They are ready for breakthroughs on Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, on women's health that has been understudied. And I don't know if those research can be restarted. Once, a delay is destruction when it comes to research. So, I don't know who's next.
Judge, you want to
All right, hello everybody. I'm Jody Vallejo, and it's such a pleasure to be with you here this evening. I like to hold my mic. I want to thank my Cal State Fullerton colleagues for inviting me to join you, and of course, my Fullerton twin over here. And it's so great to be talking to all of you. I live here in Fullerton. I love this city. I work with many of you building power, building an inclusive and just city, and so I'm so excited to see so many of you here tonight. Big shout out to Vince in the back, one of my most important political mentors in the city, who's taken me under his wing. And also big thanks to the League of Women Voters, who saved us on this panel tonight. Thank you, League of Women Voters, for stepping in to sponsor this tonight when the city raised concerns about the content of this event, even though this event has been happening since before I took my first breaths in this world. So thank you, League of Women Voters, and especially Kent Becker, who's in the back over there. So, I don't know how my colleagues up here feel, but it is so surreal to be studying the kinds of issues that we study during this time period when your research is literally becoming real. Your research is real. Not only is your research real, you're in a profession that is also under attack, where academic freedom is being attacked, where this administration is trying to erode the building of knowledge and the creation of knowledge. And you mentioned the elimination of federal funding, funding for research and grants. And so it's a really just a real time to be doing this kind of work. And one of the things that so many of us in immigration, I'm a professor at USC, I study immigration, that we all really feel very strongly about is that Trump's first 100 days on immigration isn't really about immigration. It's becoming a litmus test now for our democracy. And this is something that is raising alarm bells amongst many different scholars across a variety of fields and disciplines. In these first 100 days, I actually counted how many immigration executive actions Trump has made.
Making me look bad.
How many immigration executive actions do you think Trump has made in these first 100 days?
200.
Close, 175. 100, and what were you gonna say?
I think 178.
Ooh, close, 175, you were very close. This is compared to 30 that he made in the same time period during Trump 1. And I want to just share a couple basic facts with you. The first is that immigration policy is really a federal issue. And the federal government decides who gets into the United States. So the federal government really decides our visa policies, which disproportionately revolve around either work, high-skilled work, or family reunification. There's no way for low-wage workers to enter into the United States legally to work that allows people to stay in the United States legally. You talked about Congress, our immigration Congress policy has also been broken for decades. It's one of the reasons why Obama enacted DACA and also tried to extend those protections to parents as well via DAPA, but that was struck down by the courts. And so it's the federal government who decides who's allowed to enter the US, and it's the federal government that also oversees enforcement agencies, so Customs and Border Patrol and ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. But what's really important to understand is that we have no federal immigrant integration policies in the US besides what we provide, the resources that we provide to people who are refugees. And so immigration, even though it's a federal policy, it plays out in the states. It plays out in states, it plays out in cities, in communities like Fullerton, where we're sitting right now. Cities like Fullerton can be either very welcoming to immigrants, or they can be exclusionary to immigrants. And it's really where immigrant integration is felt most deeply, in schools, in the workplace, in neighborhoods, and so forth. And I want to share with you 3 critical facts that undermine Trump's claims and narratives, the justifications that he's using for his immigration policies. And I just published a blog post today on my Associate Director Research Center at USC, the Equity Research Institute, that has 7 facts on immigration. If you email me, I'll send you that link. But one of the things that's really important to understand is that border crossings into the US are at historic lows. And these historic lows actually started before Trump was even elected. So on the one hand, he's trying to take credit for it. And in fact, yes, his very draconian and dehumanizing policies have created a chilling effect where people are not migrating into the United States. He's also cut off legal pathways into the US that used to allow people to come to the US, asylum and refugee pathways, for example. But this really undermines the claim of a national emergency at the US-Mexico border. The other thing is that when we think about undocumented people in the US, the significant majority are long settled. The majority of undocumented people in the US have been in the United States for 10 years or longer. How many of you knew that? I'm just curious. Anyone? A few of you in the audience? So in Orange County alone, there are 200,000 undocumented people, and 1 in 6 residents in Orange County are either undocumented or live with someone who is undocumented. So being undocumented, having undocumented status, doesn't just affect you, it can affect your native-born children, it can affect the people in your family, it can affect the workplace that you're integrated into, it affects our schools because people are deeply, deeply embedded into our community. So undocumented people are not newcomers. They're our neighbors, they're people that work with us, they're raising their children in our schools, they own businesses, and of course this is all backed up by data and research. And in Orange County, 73% of undocumented people are Latino, and over 22% are Asian in origin. The Asian undocumented population is actually the fastest growing population in the US. The other thing that's really important before I move on to some of the patterns that we've been seeing with Trump around immigration policy is that immigration and crime are actually inversely related. And so one of the things that Trump always espouses is that immigrants are criminals, and he's really used this rhetoric to dehumanize people and to justify his dehumanizing policies. But decades of research, and I am talking decades of research across multiple fields, shows that there is no link between immigration and crime. Native-born Americans are significantly more likely to commit crimes than immigrants, and we have research showing that sanctuary cities are significantly safer than cities that are not sanctuary cities. Is that not from me or the data? And so there is no link between immigration and crime. It's quite the opposite. So Trump's criminal immigrant narrative is false, and these facts, again, directly contradict the policies and rhetoric of the Trump administration. And so the first pattern I want to talk about that we're seeing, again, is a remaking of who gets into the US under Trump. And we're also seeing the militarization of the US-Mexico border in very chilling ways, actually, that I'm going to talk about in just a minute. We're seeing the expansion of who is a criminal because, again, Trump is trying to use this idea of the criminal immigrant narrative to detain and deport people. And we're also seeing the targeting of not just undocumented people, but people who are legally in the US. And these are very significant changes in priorities between Biden and Trump. And trust me, you guys, Biden was not perfect on immigration. We criticized him all the time. Obama's the deporter-in-chief, so we criticize everybody. But Trump is especially concerning. So, like my colleague said on day one, Trump declared a national emergency at the border. Even though rates of immigration to the US, undocumented immigration, based on Border Patrol data, I'm not making this up, which some people accuse me when I speak publicly sometimes, based on actual data from the Border Patrol, shows that border encounters are at historic lows, but Trump still declared a national emergency at the border. He suspended key legal entry mechanisms like asylum and refugee admissions, and he has since deployed military forces. Most alarmingly, on April 11th, he issued a memo directing the Department of Homeland Security to cede 170 miles of the US-Mexico border to the US military. This means that he is charging the military with the authority to work inside the United States. This is very concerning to scholars of authoritarianism because he's turning the military inward. And it's not just, the charge isn't just to detain undocumented people. They have broad authority to detain and search anyone who they claim is trespassing on military land, which is now a 170-mile swath of the US-Mexico border. Trump hasn't been able to carry out his promises of mass deportations because he doesn't have the manpower, the infrastructure, the money yet. But what he's doing is trying to build the infrastructure to do so. He's asking Congress for over $100 billion for increased border enforcement. He's also currently, this is something that I've been obsessed with, you guys. I've been tracking this like incessantly, and I have a lot of friends that are here in the audience, and they probably get so tired of hearing me talk about this. But he's currently amalgamating a database of immigrants by commandeering federal agencies. And this is an unprecedented move. He's mining big data from IRS. Many people, including the head of the IRS, have stepped down because this is against IRS policy. It's actually illegal. He's compiling data from Social Security, visa databases for students, databases that have tracked unaccompanied minors and children. All of these are now being used to create a database of not just immigrants, but legal permanent residents. So those are people with green cards. While he's creating this list, he's also building a deportation army. The Trump administration is reinstating 287G agreements. These were actually first implemented under Obama and even a little bit before Obama. This gives local police the authority to act as immigration agents. This deputizes local police and also state agencies to carry out detention and deportations. So in December of 2024, there were 135 287G agreements. 135. December of 2024. As of today, I just looked it up. It's on the 287G website on ICE. There are 504 287G agreements. This is an unprecedented increase in the deputization of local level police agencies. And then we're also witnessing the ideological targeting of immigrants. So student visa holders and green card holders arrested for political activity, visas being revoked for low-level infractions, and then legal residents being reclassified as national security threats. One of the other things that's really, really troubling so many of us right now is that Trump is conducting detentions and deportations without due process. This is really a constitutional crisis. Most chillingly, Trump has defied court orders. He's attempted to revive the Alien Enemies Act. When was the Alien Enemies Act last used?
World War II.
World War II, to intern Japanese Americans. And he has used the Alien Enemies Act to deport people he claims are members of a Venezuelan gang to a Salvadoran torture prison without any kind of due process. The courts have actually ordered planes where people were being transferred to this notorious Salvadoran prisons with people being deported to turn back around and come back to the United States. The administration defied that order. The courts have now prevented people from being sent to this prison without due process for the time being. Who knows about the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia? Just want to see the show of hands if anybody knows about this case. This case, the Trump administration deported Kilmar Abrego Garcia to this torture prison in El Salvador. They claim that they could not locate him when the Trump administration admitted that he was wrongfully deported, that he was accidentally deported. And he remains in prison there in El Salvador despite a unanimous Supreme Court order. This is a unanimous Supreme Court order. Even the conservative judges ordered Trump to return him after his unlawful deportation. You know, it's also really chilling that people are talking about in our field is that Trump has said that he has the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, studying the laws so that he can deport U.S. citizens to torture prisons. And these deportations haven't stopped with immigrants. The administration just deported 3 citizen children with their mothers, despite their families' attempts to keep children in the country. And one of the things that's really important to understand is that very conservative judges that were put into their positions by Trump, by Reagan, are making many of these rulings against the administration. All of these actions have created fear among immigrants, citizens, people in communities. I'm going to wrap up really quickly because one of the things that's also chilling is that Trump is really exhibiting authoritarian tendencies with his actions around immigration. And things are escalating. So now he's deporting citizens. We've seen the arrests of immigration judges in an attempt to intimidate and silence. And also, again, defiance of federal and Supreme Court rulings and the refusal to give people due process that is provided under the Constitution. But one last thing we're also seeing during these 100 days that I think is really, really important to mention is that we are seeing tons of action at multiple levels of society. So the courts, federal courts, the Supreme Courts are challenging these violations. States and cities are shoring up protections. Trump has just released an executive order yesterday saying he's coming after sanctuary states, so that's and cities. So that's going to be one of our next battles. We've seen rapid response and mutual aid organizing in cities, people running Know Your Rights campaigns, school districts, civic groups, universities are stepping up and pushing back, and then every day people are protesting and organizing, and that is what democracy looks like.
Can you hear me at the back? Fine? All right. Alexey Shevchenko, Cal State Fullerton, political science. International politics, so let me soothe you. You seem to be very stressed. Let me talk about the good things in international politics. Let me start with a bird's eye view, and then I'm going to highlight some of the big developments, which are probably familiar in...
Alexa, can I ask you to use the microphone?
Okay.
Just for accessibility.
Okay.
Thanks.
I usually shout, so my lecture voice. So yeah, so let me start with the bird's eye view of international politics and Trump's administration place in international politics, and then highlight some of the big developments in some of the key regions. Then I'll take questions if any. Let me start with a quote from Henry Kissinger, right? Wise Henry Kissinger, who unfortunately died recently. From 2018, I believe, the first Trump administration. And the quote is the following: Trump is one of the figures in history who appears from time to time to mark the end of the era and to force us to give old pretenses. So what is the era? The era is liberal internationalism. This is something which kicked in since late 1940s. This is something which dominated global politics since the end of the Cold War. Trump presides over the end of it. You all know that he positions himself as a disruptor, as a wrecking ball, taking out the remnants of this post-Cold War order. He is not unique in his worldview. If you look at the big debate about the future of American international politics, American foreign policy, in the past 12 years or so, since Obama's second term, the big debate is deep engagement, which is pretty much liberal internationalism, muscular liberal internationalism, versus the so-called restraint or offshore balancing. Restraint is the idea that the United States should essentially downsize its footprint in international politics and delegate a lot of responsibilities to other nations, because the United States is exploited by others through free riding and such. So America first, that's what sort of Trump started talking in his first term. It's kind of an extreme manifestation of this sort of restraint strategy. But a lot of those ideas are supported by, by big names in realist theory. The ideas are not outlandish by itself. And I'll talk about some of those ideas. The execution of those ideas, of course, is something which generates a lot of questions and actually shock on behalf of some of the observers, because Trump is not going to speak diplomatically. He will never will. This is not, that's not his strength. And of course, there's a lot of inconsistency, and of course, there's a lot of, short-termism, and of course, there's a lot of bullying and bluster, and of course, you can imagine concerns about American credibility, right? But a lot of it is about execution, not necessarily the content. Right? So something to keep in mind. I'll come back to this idea. Let me give you an example, which you're probably familiar with. When Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, was dressed down in late February, the real shocker was not that it happened, because dressings like this happen all the time behind the closed doors. Even with Zelensky, Biden administration had clashes in the first months of the Ukraine war. They were just not advertised. The shocking thing was it was done deliberately for good TV, as Trump said it. So the style is important here. Okay, so let me go to some of the highlights of the developments in this new world of restraint. European Union is no longer a privileged partner. The view of Europe, looking at the statements by various officials from administration is the following. Europe is misgoverned, it's over-bureaucratized, it's military powerless, it's a collection of museum nations with unsustainable welfare obligations, with horrible demographics. NATO is a welfare for the rich. That's not Trump, that's one of the big realist names, Barry Posen from 2013, right? Because, well, they free ride on us. And of course, you have plenty of statements by Trump about free riding. And of course, if you look at J.D. Vance, his statements go above and beyond the usual sort of criticism of Europe. Again, it's not new. If you look at President Eisenhower, he would be complaining about European free riding in NATO. And if you know anything about Eisenhower, he would use really strong words as a military guy. Right? So not a lot of it, none of it is new, but again, the style matters. Let me give you some quotations from J.D. Vance. That's really good. Yeah. It comes from the leaked discussions of attacks on Houthis, I think, which went into the open. It's okay, it happens, right? So, Pete Hegseth is a millennial. Millennials have a lot of problems, in my opinion. In any case, I just hate bailing Europe again. I loathe European freeloading. That's J.D. Vance on this call. And then you have statements at the Munich conference, which of course shocked everyone, where Munich conference is about security challenges, right? Where J.D. Vance talks about excessive political correctness, not bringing right-wing parties into governments. And then he says, you're at risk of civilizational suicide, right, as a parting note. In any case, again, this can be traced back, this sort of view of Europe. Some elements of this view are actually correct. It is a collection of museum nations. Nothing wrong with being a museum nation. I would love to retire in a museum nation. And, the national idea of Europe is comfortable retirement. And again, nothing is wrong here. But of course, there's a big question if there's a divorce, if divorce with Europe in terms of security is in the cards, would Europe rise to the occasion? That'll be the first time Europe would be independent in terms of its security decision making, because the United States always acted as the first responder since the beginning of the Cold War until now. And would Europe cope with this? That's a big question, which of course we can talk about. Let me jump to China, which is the second biggest priority. Well, probably even more important. The question, and again, I don't know the answers necessarily, but I'm going to ask those questions, and that's something which you can consider. You can be a restrainer, but you can also be a prioritizer. Prioritizer, restrainer is the one who says, let's reduce footprint everywhere. Let's Europe take care of its own problems, and let's focus on one thing, which is, well, the challenge of rising China, the only credible rising power in international politics. Historically, well, you can expect problems between established and rising powers. So is Trump a prioritizer? It looked in his first term that he is, that he was under the influence of this sort of viewpoint. It looks to me now that it's a little bit more complex than that. I suspect Trump is more constrained by big businesses, like Musk, who's doing a lot of business in China. 40% of Teslas are sold in China. And you have a bunch of the long list of businesses, and they are probably, moderating this, right? There are certain individuals close to Trump, who are, of course, extremely set on continuing conflict with China, essentially trying to undermine Chinese economy through tariffs, through other measures. And one of them, which is probably familiar to you, is Navarro. retardo is Musk's label for him. Peter is a very interesting individual with a long history. He has very interesting beliefs, very engaging, but he is kind of a unique in many ways. Right. So I suspect that the goal with China is the big, beautiful deal. That explains very warm statements about Xi Jinping, who is an amazing guy, and we will strike a deal. I see Chinese hawks with real influence, sort of in National Security Council, kind of losing influence. A couple of them were fired recently, so I think that's sort of a sign that it's not so simple. There are limits to how far can you squeeze China economically without causing a lot of problems at home. All those tariffs, right, which Trump essentially is rethinking right now, I do not exclude the possibility of kind of a breakthrough in the relations with China. There's a recent article in Foreign Affairs, from the journal, which probably you read if you're interested in anything related to international politics. I think it's the latest issue, and the article kind of raises this idea that Trump might be amenable to some kind of a great power concert decision-making process. He's going to bring in China, but also Russia, probably like the top powers to work with. So he might be comfortable in this kind of a three great powers dividing the world into spheres of influence type of arrangement. Something which FDR was thinking about it in his last months of life. So he talked about great, four policemen idea. They will patrol the world. And of course, nothing came out of it. Cold War broke out. You have a Security Council as a remnant, stillborn child of this idea, but nothing more. Another question about China is how credible is American commitment to Taiwan? Something to consider. Computer chips from Taiwan are currently being outsourced. The production is being outsourced to the United States. If it happens, the value of Taiwan goes down. So that might be part of some kind of a future deal. China is not Russia. They would not level Taiwan with artillery. But that's something to watch for. I don't have the answers. I'm just raising those things. And finally, the world is big, so I'm taking. Finally, Russia, Ukraine. Well, here, one of the motivations is very simple. This is, it's the stalemate. Right? Biden administration really did not display a lot of creative diplomacy prior to the outbreak of this conflict. So I'm not giving Biden a lot of credit for presiding over it. NATO's open door policy, which Russia complained for ages, it's not a law of physics. It can be modified. There could have been some kind of a diplomatic process which probably would have delayed this war from breaking out. So failure to acknowledge those Russian concerns, which were not new, failure to anticipate that that Putin would actually use force, was ultimately a huge miscalculation on the American part. And then the United States essentially engaged in a proxy war with Russia. But then, stalemate came, starting from 23 or so, on both sides. Russia cannot capture more territory. Ukraine is kind of exhausted as well. So that's what motivates Trump, and that'll be sort of a realist approach, largely. Okay, this war is not winnable. Let's just negotiate the inevitable, which would be the ceasefire across the lines of control. There'll be some kind of a diplomatic, protracted peace process. Right. Of course, Trump is saying, okay, we're going to initiate this, but Europe would have to do the heavy lifting because, well, it's your problem, right? And if you want to continue the war, well, you're going to pay for this and something like that. So in this sense, yes, this is a motivation to pressure Ukraine more than Russia. Well, here, why would he do that? Obviously, Ukraine is weaker, so that's sort of a very simple kind of a tactic by Trump. Let's push the weaker party more, and we might get something. He also wants Nobel Prize, of course. I think that's what motivates a lot of this. It didn't work out with North Korea so far, despite the fact that the letters they wrote to each other were beautiful. Having stayed for a while as a researcher in Norwegian Nobel Committee in Oslo, I don't think Nobel Prize is in the cards. That's sad because that's what motivates everything. In any case, as J.D. Vance says, again, I like to quote him, Ukraine is the country I don't care about, so something to keep in mind. All right, I can talk about tariffs as well if you have any questions, because that's sort of, again, a lot of questions what those tariffs are designed to do. There are several possibilities. There's some benign possibilities, and then there's some worrisome possibilities. But we can do it, because I'm overusing my time, I assume, because I lost track of everything. Right? I'm gonna end with another quote, just again to lift your spirits, from another disruptor-in-chief, Chairman Mao Zedong, in the midst of Cultural Revolution, and of course it's one of his most famous quotes. I'm not going to use my rusty Chinese. I used to be able to do it, but Cal State Fullerton transformed me. There's a great disorder under heaven, wrote Mao, in the midst of attacks on bureaucratic headquarters, deep state of China at the time, in 1966. There's a great disorder under heaven, and the situation is excellent. Because the great disorder was the whole purpose of, wrecking the old system and then creating, in the Confucian style, dialectical style, great order. All right, so that's sort of something to think about. All right, thank you.
So at this time, I believe we want to open the floor to questions. Is there going to be a roving microphone? Is that how we're going to? And you should feel free to direct a question to any member of the panel if you would like to.
We were given specific scopes, and so there are so many things that we have not covered. And the attacks on the media, the attacks on institutions, the lack of trust that has dismantled and allowed this, the disinformation, social media. If you would like to all have a semi-conclave sleepover, we could all continue long into the weekend.
Well, my dear, you should.
And again, I direct you to support local journalism. I direct you to watch legitimate journalists. 60 Minutes had a great ending this week in defense of the attacks because of the mergers that big business and a capitalist economy want to curry favor for. And so Paramount is selling out their crown jewel of 60 Minutes, and their executive producer resigned. Watch who resigns and watch who takes a knee.
All right, so since the last, I appreciate, first of all, I appreciate all for, panel's insights tonight. And the first question, since the, last topic that we went over was the issue of, the foreign policy and the, the way that the Trump administration kind of, approaches this, foreign policy. I wanted to ask if, like, I'm assuming that, many people in the audience, like, have heard about the JCPA agreement, aka the Iran deal, which was terminated by the first Trump administration. With that in mind, and as the negotiations are going on for the second round now, how confident are you that the administration can pull out a deal which limits Iran's nuclear capabilities? We're good.
We don't know much about what's going on right now, right? My suspicion is that it'll be a repackaged deal from what Trump walked out. It'll be the same thing if Iran is willing to go back, but again, Iran is on the verge of getting a weapon. I suspect they already have it. The question is when to test it or whether to delay the test. But if the agreement happens, it'll be the same thing, I assume kicking the can down the road, just like Obama's deal, because that's the only way out, seemingly, apart from all-out, large-scale conflict, which would really undermine global economy. So that's sort of my gut feeling. Looking at previous actions like walking out from NAFTA or revising NAFTA, essentially giving it a different title, repackaging it with some minor twists, and then saying, voila, problem solved. So I think that'll be so that's the optimistic prognosis, right? For things to happen. Of course, you can imagine escalation and a conflict. But the good thing about Trump, again, let me be sort of fair and balanced here. The good thing is that he is not in favor of using military strength. He in his first term, he largely walked away from escalations. Although it came close to Iran after Soleimani was blown up. So his instincts are not warlike. Another good thing about Trump, for our purposes, and again coming back to the question of 2025, he doesn't have any ideology whatsoever. He is not interested in consistent ideological, structures. He's pragmatist. He is doing deals. Right? He's a super transactional, absolutely. Transactionalism, it's a real politique brought to the extreme. Values are not part of the conversation, which is good because he's not going to focus on, Iranian regime is authoritarian and we cannot deal with them. He's not going to buy the whole democratic peace theory. He's not a neocon. He hates their guts. Right, which is, in my sort of ranking of the least efficient foreign policy presidents in recent times, it's still, Bush 43 and his team is still above everybody in terms of the ability of screwing things up and setting Middle East on fire. And this fire continues, and then, doing all kinds of mistakes, and those guys were supposed to be educated and proficient and MBA but they forced this pact with neoconservatives, the guys who are obsessed with promoting democracy, and look what happened, right? So compared to them, it's not as bad as it could have been. I've seen worse. Right, so I hope for some kind of a resolution with Iran.
Yes.
You, Dr. Rob?
You have to give me more context.
The theory that you said, like, our Congress is broken.
Sure.
Yeah, because this is what questions me. If Trump is able to pass laws like shutting down the app that immigrants use to seek asylum, or if what was that again? And if Trump is able to pass on laws that kind of what's that word?
You're okay.
That kind of get like passed, but like, okay, let me restructure it. What was that one? Okay. Yeah, that one deportation that happened in San Diego. What questions me about Congress is that, like, if Trump is able to make all these executive orders that are bypassed, how are they bypassing Congress? That's what questions me. And like, how is Congress even approving of these things?
I'm happy to take that. So I said earlier that I blame like longer developing dynamics of Congress being sort of useless in encouraging presidents to act unilaterally because they feel pressure to act and Congress isn't doing anything. But I do think there is a Trump-specific aspect of this in regards to your question, which is, very simply put, members of Congress know that they are less popular on average than Trump among their voters. And so one of the things that we teach in our political science classes to first-year students who have taken American government is that members of Congress tend to do what they think will get them get reelected. Right? Because if you're not in office, you can't do anything. Now there's a bit of self-serving, never do anything useful, no values aspects out of that. But it's a very real thing, right? If you get kicked out of office, you can't achieve any of your goals. So I think there are many members of Congress who don't think tariffs are a good idea, or don't like the way DOGE is being done, or don't think it's good that we end cancer research. But they are afraid if they cross Trump, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down, and they lose their next primary election. So you have to ask yourself, from their calculation, how bad do things have to get before they're willing to risk crossing the person that's more popular with their voters than they are before they will cross him? We're going to find out. The fun thing is we get to all go along for the ride. I do expect the 2026 midterms today to be bad for Republicans. I don't know how bad. But my guess is they'll go down with the ship, because better that than the certain demise of crossing the president, who is pretty... I don't think Trump has been a terribly effective president in dealing with Congress, except in one way. He has secured loyalty from his party in a way that Obama or Clinton or Bush could never do.
And I think it's important to understand the threats these members of Congress and our judges are getting from MAGA supporters who are sending a clear message with pizza deliveries to their homes, to their children's homes, to send a message to judges that they know where they live. Senator Lisa Murkowski from Alaska had real fear in her voice when she said, "We are all afraid." She is getting death threats. And if you look at the DOGE tracker of where those cuts are going, Alaska is the deepest red. She won't stand up because she's getting death threats. Amy Coney Barrett's sister got death threats when she went with the majority against Trump. So there is real fear, in addition to the regular electoral fear, in addition to the consequences of the voters, there's real fear from MAGA supporters who are vitriolic and a little unhinged. And the film of January 6th has to run through their heads at night.
I'm going to be a little, very, very quick follow-up. No one makes anyone be in politics. And death threats are part of what people deal with, and if you're not willing to deal with it, that's...
It should not be, but Eric Swalwell is getting death threats and has had to hire security, and in my opinion, doing the right thing, standing up. So there is that part of it. I would ask whether or not.
I mean, who let
The country.
Who let Trump be president after
Right.
January 6th?
No, absolutely. Twice impeached. And
I have an economic question, actually. So I was one of those weird people that actually read the congressional budget after the first CR passed. And at the end of 10 years, we are going to have a $50 trillion deficit if we do give these tax cuts.
So,
How
so
is that?
debt
Of debt.
total. Yeah.
Correct, 50 trillion. We are
Yeah.
now sitting at 36.
Yeah.
So taking our country to $50 trillion in debt and having to pay the interest load on that, how are we going to manage that as a country? And is it going to have an effect on the value of the dollar if countries then decide that we are not a good credit risk and everybody starts to unload the treasury bills?
Yeah, absolutely. The budget is crucial for us to have a discussion about. The debt has been unmanageable. It's one of the reasons that Trump was so popular and the populism was so popular, because most people in the country believe that Congress and our government are broken. That there are major problems that have not been solved. I don't think anyone thinks our immigration system is working. We just disagree on what the solution should be. I don't think anybody believes that our debt is sustainable. We just disagree on what the solution should be. That is what we are supposed to have conversations in Congress, in our elections, but we haven't. And so absolutely, we need to balance the budget. I just don't agree with where the cuts are coming from.
We need more revenue source.
But we also have a context where the richest 1% in this country are getting richer and richer and richer and not paying their fair share of taxes into our tax base. Immigrants pay their fair share of taxes and never take it out. We pay our fair share of taxes. Tax the rich.
Yeah. There are a lot of solutions that we're not discussing. And we just see that there's a lot of anger because of that. And America used to do this. The income inequality after the Gilded Age, which 2.0, we were the wealthiest country with very little income inequality because we taxed the rich. And it can be done again.
Hi, thank you all for being here, and thank you for allowing me to ask a question. To the gentleman back there, you're 88? Yes? You're 88? Yeah. My dad's 84, and the elephant in the room for me today is why I came. I'm an independent, and fascism, the rise of fascism, is always at the back of my head because my family's from Belgium, and my grandfather was an immigrant, and he remembers the Nazis who occupied Belgium. They moved to Quebec, and then they moved to Santa Ana, California, in 1955. I know a lot about fascism, and I know what I'm seeing right now, and it is fascism. Fascists, they target immigrants, they target the LGBTQ community, and what I'm not liking right now is it feels like Russia has annexed the United States. The disappearing of people, whether they be US citizens or undocumented, that's going to change soon. I'm an atheist. Maybe I'll just be disappeared. Okay? I'm very concerned that due process doesn't matter to all the lawyers who graduated from Harvard and Yale Law School. They populate Washington, and yet they're unfazed by the lack of due process. My question is, the Trump administration made a mistake. Donald Trump pretends to be, omnipotent, the most powerful man in the world. And he can't call Bukele and say, I want you to return Kilmar Garcia right now. That's unacceptable to me, that they keep making excuses. All he has to do is pick up the phone. We're paying you to take in, undocumented immigrants. You do as I say, return that man right now. Return everyone that we have mistakenly sent to you. I don't understand why no one is fighting and no one, he's defying SCOTUS.
It's very difficult to watch, as I mentioned earlier, especially as someone who studies immigration and is watching the erosion of due process and other challenges to the Constitution, like birthright citizenship, for example. I will say that there are many people standing up. You might not just see it. Many people, from the Supreme Court to federal judges to circuit court judges to lawyers, that are gaining traction and standing up to this administration. I will just say, all of those who were sent to that torture prison need to be returned.
Yes.
And what about
Every single
Louisiana?
person.
What about the detention centers in Louisiana? The tough student is in there.
I agree with you.
The Columbia
There's
student.
legal challenges. People are protesting on the streets every day in every city across the United States, and we have to keep going.
And I just have, because Alexi loves quotes and you love quotes, I have a quote of my own. It's from a journalist named Evan Osnos, and he wrote a piece in December 2016. It was called When Tyranny Takes Hold, and it was about tyranny in China. And when I read it, it explained why Trump had been elected, and it's basically why all of us are here today. And this is the quote, and it was revelatory to me, and I always remember it, and I'd like you to commit it to memory. Tyranny does not begin with violence. It begins with the first gesture of collaboration. Its most enduring crime is drawing decent men and women into its siege of the truth. That's why Donald Trump got elected. That's why the Republican Party has not said anything about anything he's done. They're afraid of him, and they're corrupt, and they're craven, and they're coward. We have an epidemic of cowardice in this country. Republicans will not stand up to this man. Anyways, okay. Chairman Peace, thank you.
Hello.
I had to get that out, I'm sorry.
My question has to do with what is a win. I have been trying to make a list of things that I consider wins, and every time I put something down, it turns out maybe it's not such a win. Like for instance, the fact that Harvard stood up against Trump. That's not a great thing. But colleges are still being attacked. And we found out that Kilmar Abrego Garcia is alive, and at least he looked healthy. He didn't look like he was beaten up or anything. However, even with the Supreme Court ruling that you bring him back, he's not back yet. So everything I think is a win isn't really a win when it doesn't seem like anything is changing. So that's my question.
So let me talk very briefly about the Supreme Court decision. The Supreme Court very carefully chose the verb they used in that decision. That word was facilitate, yes, thank you. That was a weasel word. And one of the ways they got to a unanimous decision. The Supreme Court, on the one hand, the Supreme Court is happy to side with Trump when they agree with him, when they think that agreeing with him advances some of their larger legal projects. They don't always agree with him. You saw that in the first term. They would occasionally rule against him. And I think here they simply want to avoid a confrontation as long as possible because Roberts doesn't know what's going to happen if they do. As far as wins, I have a little more optimistic take than some of you, but it's a qualified optimistic take. I think Trump is not doing a good job at the things that he wants to do, in large part because his administration is made up of fairly incompetent news hosts. But because he is choosing frames and actions that are making him unpopular very fast. Why on earth would you set up an immigration platform where you make someone who is not a criminal the face of the story and make due process the story in a way that makes a lot of people angry? That was really the only issue he was above 50% on not long after his inauguration. He's below it now. He's much lower on the economy. He's much lower on other issues. I think he's speed running, maybe, to a George Bush 2007-2008 situation. I think that's relevant because when you look at a lot of places where authoritarianism takes root, it is done so initially with very large public support. We've mentioned, I'm going to say his name wrong, Bukele?
Yeah, that's fine.
What was his election support? 80%?
Yeah.
90%? Wildly popular. Philippines, wildly popular. Donald Trump, under 50%. Mainly, in my view, because of inflation. So I think, honestly, and if this turns out wrong, I'm going to look bad, but at least you can remember and laugh at me. I think he's already cooked, to use the kids' language. The only question is how much damage is he going to do on the way down? Now that, my optimism ends.
So sort of segueing into Trump's policies that have proven detrimental to him. What are, I guess, sort of the various strategies you see potentially underlying Trump's tariff policy? You mentioned that there's several potential
Okay,
ones.
yeah, I'll be happy to talk about this. Well, there's one possibility. It's just a leverage game, which will not be anything significant. It's just just threats to. The design is just to force other nations to give United States a better deal. Otherwise, the United States would withdraw its security obligations. This is what Reagan tried to do in the 1980s, when essentially he would be telling Japan, hey, you need to impose, it was called self-imposed quotas on your cars for American markets, and you better do it yourselves, and you better smile and like it, because otherwise I'm going to feed you to the Soviet wolves, right? So that's sort of one possibility. And my sort of optimistic scenario is that this is what it will be unfolding. There'll be a set of negotiations. There'll be beautiful, bespoke deals, as Scott Bessent likes to say, right? Custom-made, sweeping offers. We will see probably India signing something, or Japan, or both of them. This would calm down the markets. This would be used as a justification for tax cuts, because we're getting so much in tariffs. Now we can, who cares about the debt, right? So that's sort of one possibility. Another possibility, which is more interesting but also more troubling, is that the goal is to destabilize the dollar and to bring it down. And again, there's some parallels with what Reagan administration tried to do when the value of dollar was super high because of huge interest rates, because of big inflation in the 1980s. And again, the idea was to force other nations to essentially appreciate their currencies, to make American exports more competitive. That seems to be the dream of the real sort of people obsessed with tariffs. That's Navarro and and others, right? And let's devalue the dollar. And if you look at Trump's complaints about unfairness of economic system, they all date back to the 1980s, exactly when Reagan administration was trying to do so, right? So. But what would you do next? Well, are we trying to reshore manufacturing? Is that sort of the goal? There are some elements of manufacturing which should be reshored. Pharmaceuticals should be brought back to this country because it's a national security problem. Increasingly, yes, high-end semiconductors will be brought to this country. Maybe some better deal on cars, although that's not even clear. So that's another possibility. I'm not sure a lot of other industries can be brought back. I don't think it's just viable. United States will not reindustrialize producing, I don't know, sneakers or whatever. This is gone, right? But high tech probably can be brought back. But the second scenario is more troubling for the markets. Markets would not like it, and I think Trump listens to markets. There's a certain, market discipline, maybe not, well, the courts too, so far, right? But markets, when he meets with Walmart and Target and behind the closed doors and they're telling him, look at what you're doing, I think he listens. Right. Another possibility for tariffs, of course, is that there's some kind of an attempt to force American partners in a united front. They will sign those bespoke agreements, and there'll be just one country not part of it, and this country would be China. So there'll be united front against China. Sounds good in theory. I don't think it's gonna happen because most of the countries are gonna hedge. They're gonna do business with China and with the United States, especially if you're a smaller economy. So I'm not sure this will happen. Vietnam, for example, right, which can be viewed as China's replacement in many ways in terms of light industry. Vietnam is playing a clever game. They're pretty much doing good business with China, balancing both the United States and China. So those are the possibilities. My, again, optimistic sense, having seen the first term, is that we will have, in 3 months, whenever the pause for tariffs is over, we're going to have wonderful news. Everybody signed those treaties, the problem solved, from one victory to another. That's sort of how the Soviet Communist Party liked to portray, developments. It's just, getting better and better.
The problem is that there's already been a lot of disruption.
Right. The
And,
damage is done, so yeah. But
When the container ships stopped showing up in May,
The Port of Los Angeles is empty. There are no containers at the Port of Los Angeles right now.
well,
Trump is declaring that we are getting $2 billion a day collected from tariffs, but his own Treasury Department says it's 200 million. So the math is not mathing. And as we are aware, the consumers pay the cost that is passed on by the businesses. And I will say that Vietnam announced that they will be opening the Trump Resort. So my question is, how many of these deals benefit Trump himself
no, there'll be Trump Tower in each one of the deals. That's for
versus
sure.
better business for the United States? When Trump says we, I always wonder who he is referring to, because I don't think it's us.
It's not.
The W is upside down.
Good evening. My name is Ernie, and it's all one-sided, so I thought I'd take the other side. Okay? I'm glad we don't have 4 more years of Biden. Okay? I don't believe in his politics, I never did, but I'm sorry that they let him continue 2 years longer than he should have. Okay? Where was the media then? You talked about the media. They didn't bring it up. But that isn't what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about immigrations.
Bring it
Jody,
on.
you talked about a bunch of immigration things, okay? But a lot of people, they're people, illegal immigrants, illegal. Nobody uses that term, okay? I can because I'm Mexican descent, 3rd generation, okay? They're illegal. We have laws in the books that could handle a lot of this, but we're not using them. We chose not to
What are
listen
those
to them.
laws, sir?
Pardon?
What are those laws that you're referring to, sir?
First of all, there's a way to come into the United States, not crossing the Rio Grande at points that are not checkpoints.
Some people have no choice.
Excuse me, ma'am,
It doesn't matter. That's another country.
No.
This is the United States.
Ma'am, what is your name?
That's true.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
What is your name?
Lisa.
Lisa.
Garcia.
Can you just
You're right, I'm sorry.
let us,
Yes.
And I'm sorry for shooting back.
No, I'm sorry.
everybody take a breath.
Okay. There are rules for this.
But let me explain something to you, please. I would love to have a conversation with you about how our immigration laws actually work. As I mentioned earlier, there are no legal pathways for low-wage workers in particular to enter into the United States, to work, and to live here. Not only that, the majority of people who are undocumented in the US overstay visas. They do not enter the US clandestinely. That actually contradicts, using data and research, the assumptions and the stereotypical dehumanizing rhetoric that people constantly espouse about undocumented people in the United States. It is the United States that has created the undocumented population. Because of the militarization of the US border, because we do not bring in the kinds of immigrants that actually align with our economy, we have created an undocumented population in the United States. We cut off circular flows where people used to come into the US, work a little bit, go back home, work a little bit. Way after the Bracero program. Not only that, undocumented people in the US, because of the militarization of the US-Mexico border after 1986, after the Immigration Control and Reform Act, when we started allocating billions of dollars to the US-Mexico border and internal enforcement, people started to stay in the US. It actually caged people into the US. Our policies.
Am I going to get a chance to talk?
People, in a minute, I'm answering your question. Which
Of many that I have, I only have.
you can
so
ask
much
one
time.
question, sir, I believe that's what we're capping it at, but let me just answer your question really quickly, which is that our policies have caged people into the United States. Our policies have created an undocumented population. Our policies have criminalized an undocumented population. Our policies have also created detention centers and jails and privatized those jails where people are getting rich off of those private prisons. The private prison industry, immigration, Geo Group,
We're going way off.
No, we're not.
Oh, we are.
This is not
Okay.
way off, sir.
This is
Let me
my
finish
time
my
now.
point.
I listened to your
Let me
four
finish
panelists.
my point.
One
You're
way.
not a panelist. You get to ask a question
I
and we get
said,
to
I
answer.
listened to you four panelists.
Give me a minute and let me finish my
You
point.
got your minute.
When Donald Trump was elected, the private immigration prison industry, the value skyrocketed. This is about much more than who Trump and other presidents before him, because it's not only Trump, declared illegal because it benefits our economy. And we don't use that word because it's a racial slur.
No, we don't. It's illegal. Okay, no one's talking about the victims that a lot of these illegal criminals.
Data doesn't bear that out?
Oh, it doesn't. No, nobody wants to talk about it. Let's, who?
Provide me with the
Who is-
data, sir.
Why don't you provide me with a panelist from the right side? Unless you, next time you put it out, just say this is a one-sided panel.
Alexi
Okay?
is
No.
I'm talking, lady. I am talking.
This is not a one-sided
Okay.
panel. My
That-
research and what I say
Okay,
here
I
is based
understand
on
now
data
that it's
and research.
one-sided. That's fine.
Mr. Becker?
The last time, it wasn't. Thank you.
When we talk about elections.
Well done.
I'm used to it. We could talk for another 3 hours about all the things the Democrats have done wrong. They just don't have any power.
We almost made it, right?
Mine's a little bit more, I think my question is more based on the budget and based on, I'm sorry, based on the budget and Congress and all the things that they're doing. Now, my question is based on a lot of conversations I've had with several people. And our confusion is how Trump was allowed to, or actually Musk and his Doge people are allowed to go in, fire people, get rid of people without Congress. I understand Congress is being a lame duck in this one. And they're not doing their job. I get that. But I don't understand how legally these people can get fired if they were all in a budget that was approved.
So the short answer is that they weren't. The reality is that if you break something, you can't just easily put it back together with the court system. Courts are reactive institutions, right?
Right.
They have to wait till cases get to them. They have to wait until lawyers, and then they can say something, and you can delay it and come back again, and it can take weeks or months. And that's normal. The court system in the United States is very slow.
So could they have stayed in their positions and not walked out? The problem is they locked them out. They walked and everything else. I have cousins and family. I have a cousin who was military, 3 tours in Afghanistan. He's done a lot of things. He's worked at the Pentagon. He's worked for JPL, and they had Doge come in trying to get into JPL, and they pretty much told him to kick rocks.
Yeah, I mean,
And they told him, and I said, so what are you going to do with firepower? He says, don't worry about us, we got firepower.
one of the things that's also happened was that Musk and whoever is running Doge, I don't remember the figurehead, but the people in that orbit were able to have some of their folks be deputized, which also is happening in immigration, which is, I think, not great. Deputized as kind of de facto U.S. Marshals, which gave them the ability to come in and have some authority to get into these buildings and start looking at databases and whatnot. But again, the courts don't have any real way of enforcing their rulings. That's one of the great checks on the courts. Alexander Hamilton said they were the least dangerous branch because they don't have the ability to tax you and they don't have any soldiers. Just 9 old people in the building. So I think that's still
Some of
somewhat...
them are our age.
Hey.
Let's.
Hey.
older.
Hey.
But that's still a problem, right?
And can Trump be literally arrested? No. Or for treason, because he is very treasonous?
So treason in the United States is defined extraordinarily narrowly for a reason, because the British Crown got a little loosey-goosey with who was a traitor. I am certain that Doge and Doge folks have broken a number of federal laws here and there on privacy or access to databases. Information that should not be getting out has gotten out. They deleted things. And they might come to regret that. Although the last time the Biden administration chose not to, or at least the Attorney General didn't take a lot of those things that seriously. So I'm sorry, I'm doing the academic thing where I've already forgotten what your question was. But I think the answer is that the executive branch is the one who acts.
And the courts are ruling against what Doge has done. That's one of the reasons it's costing us $136 billion, because the workers who were fired, the courts have ruled that a number of those were unauthorized and they had to be rehired. Now, one of the problems with what you said is that it's hard to put things back together. I don't know if they're coming back. The international students who lost their visas, many of them, if my child was in the United States as an international student, there is no way I would allow that child to come back to the United States for fear that they would be deported to another country for a traffic ticket.
I have a brother and sister-in-law who used to work for the federal government, State Department and IRS. And how long can they wait? Right? Could take months for the court system to decide. Finally, they have to be rehired. They have a mortgage. They have children, so they're gone. They're going to work for private industry, and they're going to work for the state of Maryland. And you don't have to believe me, but they were both good public servants who could have gotten higher paying jobs doing something else. One of them will.
I was a public servant for a while, so.
You're losing a lot of good people you won't get back.
Brain drain.
Jeff, 2 more questions.
Okay, panel, I'm going to ask you to take off your researcher hat and put on your activist hat, because we've heard a lot of scary information, and I'm thinking especially, I'm not content with the statement you made, Professor Robinson, that death threats are part of the job of elected officials. I think we deserve better than that, and we the people need to demand better than that.
Was not endorsing death threats.
Well, but you said, I'm an elected official, and you said it like, you didn't have to choose to run. I chose to run because I care about my community and my kids, and we want more people like that doing that work. So we have to change that. I'm also not content to wait till 2026 and the midterms. We need to act today. So I'd like to know from you, what are you teaching your 19-year-olds? What can we do now to create change? How do we use the power that we have to push back and even give courage to our elected officials to do the right thing in the face of these very scary threats?
I'm sorry if I came off as flippant. It was not my intent. My point was, I don't feel like you can absolve people in Congress of doing the wrong thing because they face threats. Because in a country of 330 million people, there will always be threats against elected officials because a lot of people out there are nuts. Now, has it gotten worse? Absolutely. Should this happen? No. But I believe, and this is not to, I think if Murkowski thinks she has to bend the knee because she's afraid of her supporters, what are our options there? What am I supposed to do about that? As far as what do I tell my students, I tell them that members of Congress don't tend to get a lot of legitimate grassroots feedback on issues. And that when they do, they get nervous. And I think that one of the things that I tell them to do if you care about something is to call your member of Congress, call your legislator, let them know what you're thinking. Now, I have noticed in my own citizen role that not everybody's phone mailbox is on right now. And that sometimes when I call, I don't get anyone. But that in itself is a statement. So I think, I don't want to sound like V for Vendetta or like I'm a member of a militia group, but members of Congress should be afraid of their constituents only to the extent that they might lose their jobs. And I think for the average person, that's the easiest way to get involved because protesting can be kind of scary. You don't know where to go or what to do or how to show up. But anyone can pick up the phone and call once a week. And call, don't email. Email goes into the void or gets answered by a 19-year-old. So that's my advice.
I tell my students and others that if there is an issue that you care about right now, commit yourself to it. We cannot be everywhere all at once. There is so much being hurled at us constantly. Commit yourself to that issue. Call your congressperson, call your senators. Also, work on it at the local level. The local level is where resistance begins. Build communities. There are people doing all kinds of work in every administration, but right now it's even more critical. If your issue is immigration, there's mutual aid organizations that are working to support immigrants. There's cities, ways that you can speak at your city council to support sanctuary policies for immigrants, for example. Your issue might be something else. Commit yourself to that issue and show up, because you know what we're also seeing in this administration is that pushback really matters.
Yes.
Pushback matters. What's his name? The guy that owns Tesla? Elon Musk. His business is failing because of what people are doing. Trump is reversing policies because of pushback, because of people acting together in community. And so this is the time to build community. Find out who inspires you, find out who can lead you, and step up if there's something that you really believe in. That's what I tell my students. And we do this every day here in Fullerton.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand that there's also it's only 100 days.
Oh my God.
So this is a marathon and not a sprint. And so for my students whose political memory only includes Trump, 10 years to an 18-year-old is their entire political consciousness. They do not remember the America that you do. But also, when I had some students who asked if they should protest, I said, maybe not this one. Let the old white people go first. And they are. Because my students of color might be deported without due process. So I don't want them on the front line for that. But I do want them to show up to city council meetings, because young Kim won't have a town hall meeting, but she meets with the Brea City Council. So put pressure on the Brea City Council so that when they meet with her, they know that they will suffer consequences for what is happening. There's a lot that can be done, and if your Congress member's phone is off, get a postcard. We've seen the effect of personal protest that Congress can't ignore. And so there's many, 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 many ways. But this exhaustion is by design. This is Steve Bannon's playbook to bombard us with information so that we disengage. In this last election, I learned that 43% of Americans actively avoid the news. And some days I'm jealous because I can't. But I understand why people tune out, because it is hopeless. It is too much. And particularly because our students can't escape the information the way that we used to in days of yore, of picking up a newspaper and seeing what was happening and then putting it aside. We take that with us. And the anxiety and stress, and particularly of Gen Z, that feels individually responsible to act. And that is stressful. And so we have to all hand off the baton when we can and take what works for us, because there is no shortage of work.
History is repeating itself verbatim, and it's scaring the living hell out of me. I grew up at the beginning of TV, so I learned about history. That's what was, TV was new, and they didn't have anything new to put on TV, so they put the old. But my question is, have any of your students calculated the per diem, per person money that the Trump administration is putting into all these detainees that they're sending to El Salvador, or San Salvador, El Salvador? El Salvador. And and also, what is going to be the cost of Trump's birthday military parade? Is that what it's? And I will leave you with this. It's a very familiar phrase. Evil prevails only when good men do nothing. And and it's a scary thing. So I thank you for allowing me to speak.
Panelists, anything left?
I think that's a great place to end.
Yeah. Thank you.